to share with us on steps 6 and 7.
Good morning. My name is Mike Hess. I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here this morning, and it's good to be sober and to be back at Stateline, which is the most overly intense AA event I've ever attended. If you're new, most things are much simpler. If you were able to sit through 6 speakers yesterday, my hat is off to you. I got here late and missed some, so I was grateful. And not that I was grateful to miss the talks, of course. I will listen to your CDs very frequently. But the people I got, the guys that spoke on Thursday night, the people who spoke Thursday and yesterday, I've heard a lot of you before anyway, and you are, without just saying it from the podium, examples of the way I wanted to be in AA. You know, and the guys I heard yesterday, the speakers, I really appreciate it. I'll get to you in a moment. Because I have a lot of thoughts about what you said. That really have nothing to do with my topic, but I'm going to weave them in like they do. Some way, I'm going to pretend that they do. Well, let me just start with Jeff. You know, it was an amazing talk. You threw me off for the rest of the evening when you mentioned that you were somewhere and some famous actress had asked you to dance. And then kind of built it up as if you would tell us who that might be. And then didn't. So instead of thinking of my own topic today, I was trying to guess who that person may have been. And I thought of people like Angelina Jolie or J-Lo. Obviously that couldn't be. I mean, I ruled them out instantly. And I'm pretty sure it was Roseanne Barr, wasn't it? Pretty sure. You don't have to admit it, but it only fits with the image I have of it. I enjoyed your talk a lot. We share a lot of the insecurities of life, and I appreciate that a lot. Last year, Jeff gave me maybe Jeff's my favorite person this morning, because last year he talked about the fact, when he came up to speak up here, he said that he put on his suit and he thought he'd lost weight. He had to tighten his belt up a lot. But that he noticed that his pants had just slipped under his stomach more. Every day when I put on my belt and my pants are a little longer, you know what I mean, Jeff? And they've slipped down a little more, I think of you. And then when I was getting ready to come up to speak, one of my friends here said, now just remember, just think of everybody in the audience naked. I do. Even when I'm not speaking. So it really doesn't help me much. It's like, okay, I'm still naked. Which brings me to Pat Yo. Pat's been sober. I've been sober for 39 years. Pat's been sober longer and came out of the group that my sponsorship came out of. So I was around her crowd as an observer for a long time. And whenever she would mention some of her misconduct with men, it made me very happy. Do you know what I mean? But last night, when she explained all the people that she was friendly with, I was trying to add up the numbers, Pat. You're kind of like a professional basketball player. A lot of people that were in that group. I lose track when you're talking and think back, why didn't I know you in school? I always seem to meet these nice ladies after they've cleaned up their act. You know that? So if any of you are still struggling with your morals, please see me after that. I'm up here to talk about defects of character. And then, of course, Marilyn. Marilyn Slater is like the classy lady of Southern California in Alcoholics Anonymous. Not that you're not Sharon, but you're not a scientist. And I've always held her in high esteem because of a lot of reasons. But one of them was she was kind to me when I was new and went out of her way to make me feel okay, which I don't feel most of the time by myself. But last night when she explained to me that she made up a story about suturing up a cat, performing surgery on an animal, you fell into the category of Max and the other speakers who continually lie. You know, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm sitting in the audience taking advice from people who can't tell the truth. So there is a certain mental illness to my degree of life. You know, and I don't want to say that I'm overly sensitive, because every speaker so far has indicated they are, so I'll pretend I'm not. But let me just give you an example of something that hurt deeply yesterday. I got here, and on the first break, I'm walking along trying to get some attention from Bob Darrell, and say, hey, look, I'm here now. Yeah, I know. And he's talking to somebody, and he's going, wow, tonight's lineup. Now, that was last night's lineup. The speakers tonight are our power speakers. I'm here as a weak speaker this morning I wasn't going to tell that story for two reasons. One, I don't want you to know that I'm a baby. But more importantly, I didn't want Don Landis to know either, because now he's going to feel bad about himself too, right? If the power started Friday night, the weaker group was on Saturday. Sunday is like, it's just like, no, there's nothing left. I've been privileged to have Larry as my host. I've not seen him, but I've been privileged to have him. I don't need much, Larry, thank you. Which is what you've given me so far. I found the coffee line myself, thanks. Always a pleasure to be in AA. Now, if somebody had said to me, what steps would you like to speak on? I mean, there's some power steps, right? The 4-step, Max just did a great job on that. I've never met anyone who was choked out at the DMV before. You know what I mean? It's a privilege. And the IRS came to your house. And you were going to talk on change. Huh? That's you do have a great gift, and I appreciated hearing you today. And something else that I admired about Max, which because I'm judgmental, is sometimes when there are speakers and they have a certain amount of time, including me, and you think you have to fill it, sometimes it's a nice gift to just be done. When you've said everything appropriate to be said, and you did a fine job at that this morning, and I appreciate it. We had a guy at my home group the other night, and he was talking about the fact that as a kid, how out of place he felt. A very common kind of theme with people and not doing well. And he said he was in Little League, and they started him out as shortstop. But then when they realized he couldn't stop anything, he eventually ended up in right field, which a lot of us know that position. But he said when it came time to get up to bat, and if there already were 2 outs, and he was 2 people away, so there was one more person that was going to get up to maybe either hit a ball or make an out, he wished that the person before him, even though it was his own team, would strike out, so he wouldn't have to do it. And I bring that up for a lot of reasons. One is this. The fear of looking bad has been something that has dominated me all of my life, although I didn't recognize it in those words or those terms. The fear of being judged has been overwhelming. I've had 4 great sponsors, 3 of whom are dead. And all of them have done one great favor for me. And that is I react emotionally to everything. When Father Martin used to speak in the old days, he would talk about the fact that one of the things that was important to do in sobriety was to get, instead of having emotions above intellect, to flip it over and have intellect above emotions. That was the whole job and the whole process of being sober, to not always react emotionally to every single real or imagined hurt. It's painful to go through life having that kind of fear. It's painful to live, for me, with the thought of being judged all the time. And the worst part, maybe, is the judging of myself. I'm going to talk about defects of character sometime in a minute. But one of the worst ones that I know of is self-judgment. And yet it's not one that's listed in the book. It's not one that's talked about a lot. But it's that consistent pain inside of being just alive and making some kind of mistake. I can stand at a podium or tell my friends in AA all the time that my life is unmanageable by me, that I'm powerless over my life, that I have surrendered my life. But I spend an inordinate amount of time inside trying to figure out how to manage my life. An inordinate amount of time, because the real reason is this: I'm too fearful to really let go of things in the world. Father Martin used to tell a story that I usually try to end with, but I have a call. I hate it. Oh. Yes, Bob? He asked me to mention him more often during the talk. I will. I'll try. It's one of my friends. He tells the story about the man that was out walking one night and he falls off a cliff. It's pitch black and he's falling and falling and falling, and he reaches out and he finally grabs onto a branch, and he's terrified as he hangs there. And when he can speak, he yells out, "God, if you're up there, help me." And a voice comes back and says, "Yeah, I'm up here. Let go of the branch." And the man hangs there a few more seconds and says, "Anybody else up there?" It's one of my favorite stories because that's the way it's been for me since I've gotten sober. No matter what it is I've been worried about, no matter what defect is driving my insecurity at the moment, no matter how much fear I have going on about things aren't going to work out the way they're supposed to, there's always somebody who says, in some fashion, "Let go of the branch. It's going to be okay." And I'm too scared to let go of the branch. Of myself, I'm too scared to do that. And the end of that story was when daylight came, the man hanging there looked, and he was only hanging a foot off the ground. He'd been hanging all night out of terror. That, in a nutshell, has been the story of my existence if I'm not careful. And prior to Alcoholics Anonymous, it really was even more so, which seems odd to me that it could be even any more so than it was. When I came into AA, I had no problem identifying with being an alcoholic, simply because I didn't know what one was. I didn't mind being an alcoholic. I took a warped sense of self-esteem in being a bad drinker. It felt good to me to be a bad drinker, to run around with people who were equally dishonorable. It was a pleasure for me to do those kind of things. And one of the things that happened to me when I first came in here is I would hear people say things like, "Are you willing to surrender your defects of character?" Well, and I would say yes, and I meant it. It was genuine, it was sincere, but here's the thing. I didn't know really what they were. It's easy to say I'm willing to let go of resentment, but really? Not really. I mean, I took a certain pleasure in resentment. It does make me feel a little bit superior. Bill Wilson wrote about people like me better than anybody I've ever read, and I read a lot. But he talked about the fact so often that it's our instincts gone astray that caused us to drink. And when I read that, I think, really? I mean, really? Is that why I was drinking? And the older I get and the longer I stay sober, the more I believe it's really my story pretty much. I mean, there were other reasons to drink too. But if you're in as much discomfort as I am as a human being, drinking does solve an awful lot of that. Alcohol does for me what we tell each other to do in AA all the time, to live in the moment, to live one day at a time. If I walk into a bar worried sick about my whole existence, and I start drinking with you for a few minutes, I'm right there in the bar and I don't care about anything else too much. But when I leave, the terror comes back again. And by the terror, I mean my own thoughts. The constant belittling, fearful thoughts. I was raised in an alcoholic home, an Italian home, where my parents loved me to pieces. And my mother ensured that my brother, my sisters, and I were always made to feel special, extremely special. And yet there was an underlying message in that home that there was something wrong and other people wouldn't recognize our specialness. And so I grew up not even consciously aware of the fact that slights, to me, the things that were talked about here that are funny, the way people look at us, the way people don't look at us, the way people ask us to do something or don't ask, were really often just the result of other people's jealousness over seeing such a special person. Now, today I know that's true, and but it took me a lot of years to get here. Of course it isn't true, but I believe it. And I can laugh about it this morning, and yet later on this afternoon, or while I'm talking, have the same thought again. I don't know about the other speakers. They're at Stateline are some of the best speakers I've ever heard in my life. And it is hard to get up and speak amongst that company and try to carry the same kind of quality. I hated public speaking as growing up, and you know, I've said it as a joke, but it's the truth. Public speaking to me meant talking to any other person outside my home. You know what I mean? It was like one other person, but it would be public, and it would be a risk that I might not be cool, and God forbid if that's the truth. So when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with all those fears and the hurts and the wrongs, several things started to stand out for me and do even more today. There's an explicit message from Bill Wilson, from Chuck Chamberlain, who I'll talk about in a minute, and from a doctor named Harry Tebow, who was a psychiatrist that I love reading his works. He was a psychiatrist at the time that Bill and the guys were getting AA going quite a bit. And he eventually became Bill's psychiatrist. And he also was on the Alcoholic Foundation. And there's several of them, but one called The Collective Writings. And in it, he talks about alcoholic behavior. And some of that behavior happens to mirror my behavior and my thoughts perfectly. And one of the big issues in there that he has stressed over and over again is the need to be humble, a word that I have no familiarity with. And it's not because I don't want to be humble, but if you're as terrified as I am, being humble is risky. If you're really, he has a phrase in his book, one of his books, where he talks about the fact that how dangerous it is in Alcoholics Anonymous to single out any people for special recognition, in his opinion. And that the term trusted servant being used by the original members of our fellowship was a perfect term, so nobody was singled out for that. Because he said that ego is the arch enemy of sobriety. And you know, I'm thinking, oh yeah, okay, that's all nice. Because I couldn't hear till I could hear. Somebody said it last night, I think it was Pat. I couldn't hear what that really means. Chuck Chamberlain said it in different ways in Southern California and all over, I guess, but when I was growing up in Alcoholics Anonymous, he said it perfectly with different distinctions about the need to get rid of the human ego. And that's what defects of character stem from, according to the way I've been raised in Alcoholics Anonymous. And here's what I mean by that. I'll give you a couple examples. And by the way, when Tebow and them talked about ego, he said, I mean in the common, ordinary sense of the word. We all know the characteristics of the person who thinks they're too special, who shows a certain amount of arrogance. And he tied that into the characteristics of being alcoholic, of being unable to accept frustration. Long lines, huh? Other people alive. It is impossible for me to be happy, joyous, and free when I'm always comparing myself to you. When even a compliment to you makes me feel bad and has nothing to do with me. I don't want to admit that to anybody in the world. You know, I don't want to be able to have to say that inside I live in a competitive world, don't even know it's competitive. I didn't know that was competition. It's insecurity. It comes from fear. It comes from the feeling of not being good enough at a level that I didn't make happen. I didn't want to grow up and have those kind of emotions. Now those instincts gone astray that Bill Wilson writes about, in my opinion, are, well, who cares if it's my opinion, are obviously absolutely necessary. They're the kind of things that made me successful in my profession eventually. I was paid in sobriety to fight. I'm a lawyer. I was a prosecutor. And my own fear of losing a case drove me to make sure every detail was taken care of. My own need to have people say, wow, you're unbelievably good, was a great charge in being unbelievably good. But here's the drawback to that. I don't get it all the time. And when I don't get it, the world comes crashing in again. It starts to feel really bad. Now, where do you go to tell people that? Well, I go to a group of about 1,000 people and just admit it. But it's the truth. God, I'll tell another story on myself. I got invited to speak somewhere very nice on the East Coast a while back. And I was really excited about it. And I wanted to brag about it, but I like to fake humility periodically. And so I would casually mention it while walking by strangers, but I pretended like it was no big deal. Until I saw the brochure. And I was scheduled at 9 in the morning on a Saturday. Not quite as bad as 10, but close. And I called Bob. I don't know if you remember. But my feelings were hurt. Because those are people who speak know there are certain spots that are the prime spots, huh? And we may not say it, but... By the way, I won't be here tonight for tonight's speaker because... because some people might mistakenly think that's the big time. But, you know, we know 10 o'clock Saturday morning is, and so I had to call Bob and admit to him that I was wounded. Now, I'm an old man. Nobody likes an old, wounded man. You know what I mean? It's like, come on. Grow up. You're getting to go do this and that. I was really not going to go. So I got off the phone, I thought, I'm not going. That's all. I mean, 9 o'clock? But I pretend like it doesn't bother me to the other people. And I get there, and it was a tremendous meeting. And it's like every lesson in life that is almost every lesson in life that's based on my emotions. I was wrong. My defects of character, one more time, tricked me into believing that I was right. The single biggest defect that covers all of them for someone like me is the delusion that I know what it is that's going to make me happy. And I fall for it every few minutes. And I can stand up here and say, intellectually, that's not true, because nothing has made me happy. I often joke and say I was born disappointed, but it's the truth. You know what I mean? I often feel momentary relief followed by a new concern, but I have... But you can't give me enough to fix something that's wrong with me. And I can't either. You know, I make jokes about it. I've told it up here several times. You know, I can tell my mood by how many Amazon Prime packages I get in a month. It just... I'm always returning them. Like, I don't want a toaster. I got one. I was going to return a TV last week, but it was too big. It was like, I can't even pack it back up. What it really is, whether it was chasing sex, whether it was running around trying to get attention, whether it was people telling me at work how good I was, whether it's being in AA and being told how special I am and how dangerous that is for someone like me. For a little while, that soothes the worry, but it never leaves. Dr. Thibault uses a phrase called eternal restlessness. And I understood that term the first time I read it. It is an anxiety at a certain level, whether it's great or small, that eats at someone like me. I'm okay for a while. But when I came into AA, here's what caught my attention. I was in this treatment center. It was my last night in there on a Sunday night. The hospital and institutions panel came in to talk to us, which provoked anger in me that we had to quit watching TV. And I went in and this guy's babbling on. I'm planning my life. And then he said something that angered me, so I paid attention. And he said, "Do you want to know what I found here in Alcoholics Anonymous?" And I thought, no, I don't want to know. Because I knew what he found, right? He found friends. Yay, good. I had friends. I was always calling them on the payphone. "Hey, what are you guys doing at the bar?" Telling them about the girls I'd met at meetings. He found God. I wasn't looking for God. I was raised Catholic family, Catholic high school. I thought I was going to be a priest one day. I look back on it now, I probably should have been. Maybe I'd have, well, never mind. I almost slipped. And he said, "I'm going to tell you what I found here in Alcoholics Anonymous." And I thought, well, why'd you ask us if we wanted to know if you were going to force us to listen to this? But I was mad enough to pay attention. And he said, "I found a higher degree of mental comfortableness. I have peace of mind." And I'd never had peace of mind. He wasn't talking about being special. He wasn't talking about being the top dog about anything. Bill Wilson wrote a lot about having to be a number one man, about having to master whatever it was he was doing just to feel okay. We share that with each other at meetings all the time. It's a terribly hard way to live. It can be done. But if it really works, if getting all the attention, getting all the sex, getting all the money and everything in the world really works, why do so many famous rock stars and people kill themselves? My assumption is because they probably feel like I do. Because there's almost more of an emptiness once I get whatever it is I think I need to have, only to find myself just as sad and lonesome as I was before. And the only thing that has worked for me was being a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went back to my room that night that I heard that guy talk about peace of mind, and I started to read the big book for the first time ever by myself. Last night when I read it again, it has the same effect on me. It has a calming effect on my emotions. It doesn't take them away. But that, coupled with having a sponsor that when I call to complain about my life, who puts it back in perspective, makes life not just tolerable. I would have accepted tolerable. It makes it good. It makes nice things happen. It makes my heart happy sometimes. It makes me have that joy that you guys were talking about last night. It escapes me when it doesn't. When I was after my first year sober, I went broke for my first year, almost totally broke, and I was looking for work, and things were going bad. And I called Chuck C. Now, I didn't know how important he was, or I would not have called him. Honestly, I had no, that's how out of touch I was with reality. And I wanted to ask him a question, so he said, "Why don't you come to my house?" And I was working not too far away, so I drove over there, and his wife was home, and they were very cordial. And the question I wanted to ask him is, should I go to law school? And instead, he talked for like an hour about himself. I'm waiting for a break in the talk so I can worm my question in somewhere. And then he gets all done and thanks me, and we look at the ocean, and he's doing his normal stuff, and I go back to my office, and I realize I don't know what he said. I don't have a clue what I'm supposed to do. So I called him back right away and said, "This is Mike, do you remember me?" Only to embarrass myself, of course. And he said, "Well, of course, you were just here." And I go, "Yeah, I know, but I don't know what to do about law school." And he said, "What's your reason for going?" And I said, something like, to better my life. And he said, "That's the absolute worst reason on earth to do anything." Now, immediately I wanted to say I hadn't finished my sentence. It was also to help everybody for free. But it was too late. Now, there he is, the guy that I think is the most spiritual human I've ever known, and I've now embarrassed myself with that one. But I know today what he meant. It did better my life. I made more money. I had a lot of attention, because prestige is necessary if you don't feel good about yourself. It's more necessary if you don't. For people who are secure, and I assume there's some in here, you don't need it. Who's happier at a meeting? The speaker or the person in the back of the room who doesn't need the attention? Maybe both. I'm not saying they're exclusive. What I'm saying is and I can't change my own motives, which is what I'm trying to get to in a long fashion. I cannot change the fact that my instincts sometimes cry out that I need more from you. I got mine from chasing women all my life. It's fine. In fact, I encourage it. But I was down at your group one night, down at you Pacific Groupers, and I was going to be the speaker, and the 10-minute speaker got up, and she was talking and very sincerely got up and was saying, you know what, she woke up one more morning with another guy in bed and knew she needed to get sober. And I'm sitting in the audience waiting to come up thinking, if that had happened to me, I'd have stayed out an extra night or two. You know what I mean? It was my defects helped me cope with my own lack of self-worth. I didn't know any of those terms. I didn't know what any of it meant. I just knew that the more attention I got, the more I could tolerate life. The drunker I was, the more I could tolerate life. And so, what I've had to take a look at, Chuck used to tell the story, you all remember it, whoever have heard him or listened to his CDs or read the book, about he was visiting a hospital in Laguna Beach one time to see a patient, and there was some kind of thing going on in the alcoholism ward, and they invited him to come in and sit in, and the counselor was teaching the people how to handle their defects of character. And he said he jumped up and interrupted and said, "No, wait just a goddamn minute. If we could have handled our own defects of character, we would have done it a long time before this." And he used to go on to tell this story. He said that defects of character are like obsessions of the mind. They come from the ego. Now, there's Dr. Tebow saying we have to reduce the ego. There's Bill Wilson saying that the whole thing about the steps is reduction of ego. And yet I've spent all of my life trying to get my ego built up more. And so a conflict hits. I don't know what's right. I can imagine an imaginary person who doesn't need the same kind of things I need just to be content, who can be okay in a crowd and not have to, and not overhear Bob say hurtful things and be wounded. I can imagine that happening. I can imagine somebody, as a kid in school, when they would come in and go, we're going to pick somebody to be and I didn't get it. I remember one time there was a teacher I wanted his attention so badly. And finally one day he came to class and he said, "Mike, come on with me, and I'm feeling so cool." And he takes me to the principal's office, and they both sit down. And I'm thinking, wow, who knows what they were going to do. It's something good. And he said, "Why'd you write fuck on the wall?" I hadn't. I wish I had, but I had not done it. And they wouldn't believe me. They never believed me. That kind of craving, that kind of need, I recognize not only in myself, but at the people that are my friends. I judge harshly. I learned it. I'm good at it. I judge myself, and then I have to be careful because I start to judge you. I can be at a meeting, I think it was Jeff was talking about it, and just watch people's faces and realize how wrong they are. You know what I mean? It's terrible to be that sensitive. I don't want to be that way. And so what I'm grateful for is this. When they wrote in the 12 and 12, Bill Wilson wrote the big book, and then he had like 15 years to finally get everything together for the 12 and 12, and he had experience. Here's my question. Does God really remove defects of character? Really? Bill Wilson wrote, yes, it's obvious. He relieved the mania for alcohol. That was an easy one for me to concede. Yeah, I lost the urge to drink when I was 90 days sober after I said a prayer, and it has never come back to me, ever. But what about the other more deadly defects sometimes? And here's what the people I look up to have taught me. Yes, God removes them temporarily. But Chuck used to say it. Tebow writes about it. We talk to each other about it. Ego returns. It comes back to that same word over and over again. When my ego comes back, and it can be triggered by good news, bad news, no news, all of a sudden, I'm back with some of those same defects, and it gets frustrating. But then I hear people say things like Pat was talking about, her behavior had to change. By changing behavior, I don't think, first of all, a couple of things I don't think are that important to God. I don't think God cares if I know who he is or isn't, or the details of him. My experience has been this for 39 years. I've learned more about the God I believe in and will until the day I die, and none of it may be correct. I don't know. I have ideas, and they have worked for me pretty well. My God today in Alcoholics Anonymous, we say it to each other, but I'll explain what I mean by it, is truly not a punishing God. I am not one of those kind of individuals who believes that God does anything bad to people to teach them a lesson. In my business, I was in charge of homicide. I've seen lots of violence firsthand. I have been very violent firsthand. I don't think, when people say to comfort each other, well, God must have a reason for that, I have trouble swallowing it. They may be right. There's a guy that speaks, I haven't heard for a while, but he used to come out to Casablanca, my home group, and he would tell a story about driving up a mountain road with a bunch of people, and as he went around a corner, a boulder fell and just missed him and crushed the family behind him. That was his evidence of the proof of God. Now, I may die and God go, yeah, I didn't like that other family. I pushed the boulder over on them. I woke up this morning and thought I'll give somebody cancer and I'll do this because I want them to learn a lesson. I mock God, I guess, but I'm not really mocking God. If I'm going to turn my will and my life over to the care of something, I don't want it to be that kind of God. And my experience has been the more open I've gotten about having a loving God who just wants to take care of me, the better my life really has gone. So, when they say step 6 is the step that separates the men from the boys, there are a couple of things I think are important. One is they weren't woke yet, right? So they said men from boys instead of older people from younger people. Because here's a risk. If I ask God to remove my defective character to be somebody, and he does, what am I left with? Now, I know today what I'm left with, peace of mind. But when my fear is active and my need for attention is so strong, I can't stomach the thought of just being nobody. Dr. Tebow has a paragraph that he writes about, he said, the one day at a time, the 24-hour principle in Alcoholics Anonymous is the answer to those kinds of things, to truly live in the now. Because as we know, it's never current pain that members of AA can't handle. It's usually the future pain that's overwhelming. We get through hard things and deaths and sickness and that. But the thought that this will be like this forever, for me at least, is way too much. And so he says in there that a person who is truly like nothing, because he said that's what an alcoholic, he was worried when the Alcoholic Foundation was going to be taken over by alcoholics. He thought it would ruin our ego, that the people on the board would start thinking too much of themselves, that the fellowship would start thinking too much of itself. And I understand why you'd be worried about that after being a member of my meeting. But my point is this. He describes a character that would exist who's as of nothing. And he says they have a quiet heart, that they're at peace, that they don't have to have special things happen to them just to be content, that they can just be alive and accept things. That's the goal I try to work toward. I accept the fact what you've taught me, and will keep trying to learn it. That's this. I am entirely willing to have God remove my defects of character when they're painful. Step 6 and 7 are there for that reason. But sometimes I wish there was a step 7B, where I can take them back for a while. You know what I mean? And then just turn temporary. I'd like another defect again this afternoon. But it doesn't work that well for me. When I finish talks sometimes in the past, I don't do it as much today, but I do it. I will beat myself up over the talk. There is probably nothing more painful on earth than to be alone in a room somewhere thinking, God, that was a bad one. And know there are 1,000 people who didn't even pay attention anyway. I come to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings because I choose to. I haven't come for a long time because I have to. But I have to if I want to have peace of mind. I'll finish with this 2-hour story. My original sponsor was a man named Don Hopes. He came out of the Pacific Group. Keith was his original sponsor, and then Clancy. I picked him as my sponsor because he looked wealthy. I was selling real estate at the time, and I thought, this guy will be able to help me a lot. He had big diamond rings. He drove a big Lincoln, which was an old brand, a big Lincoln Continental, which was a big old car. He was loud, typical AA, I guess. And that first year that I had him as a sponsor, he started making me take the actions that you guys, especially in Southern California, took. Actions that seemed to have nothing to do with my life, and yet turned out to make my life tremendous. He lost all that stuff over the years. He went bankrupt, he lost his home, he lost his car. He tried a few more times to make his fortune, and periodically he would make big money and then lose it again. Everybody has an area in AA that I know well that's their primary character defect area, if you will. For some people it's money, for some people it's prestige, for some people it's the sex, for some of us it's everything. And his was the money angle. Eventually he lost it all and ended up in Oklahoma in this tiny little town called Hominy, Oklahoma, which population 8, I think. And he was living in Section 8 housing, government helped housing, and living on his Social Security, which wasn't much. And he was the most content human being the last 5 years of his life that I've ever known in AA. Now, I don't mean I don't think you have to lose everything to be happy. What he was an example of for me was this. When he finally got beaten into surrendering the thing that was eating at him so much, contentment filled in. He had a nice relationship with a little farm lady. He drove an old car that barely ran, went to what they called eating meetings, where there were 6 of them eating pizza at night. And he had the thing I want from AA, or from life, from God. Contentment. Contentment without some string attached to it to make it okay. I'm a champion or a cheerleader for steps 6 and 7. I wish they worked permanently, or I could do them better, maybe is a better way to say it. But I can't. So what I do is this. I ask God to help me to remove whatever defect of character it happens to be that I can recognize at the time. And sometimes I get an immediate relief, and sometimes I don't. And here's what I've added to when I don't. I think maybe I need to have it so I can share it with other people. I mean, not a real destructive one, you know what I mean? For instance, if everybody in AA was doing it perfectly and I wasn't, I was the only one that still felt insecure, I wouldn't stay in AA. I wouldn't understand when you told me that you still feel bad. I wouldn't be useful to anybody. Because what I've always looked for is my will, and my will is this, for me to be content. Instead of asking in the way we're supposed to ask for God's will, to show me what to be. I appreciate being a part of Stateline. I appreciate the friends I've made up here, and I'm truly grateful that my talk is finally over. Thank you very much.